One photo. One moment. One former president standing his ground against one of America's most powerful voices. What happened next left millions speechless. The photograph would go on to be dissected, debated, even canonized in political media memory. A single frame, Bill Clinton, his hand resting over his chest, eyes firm yet compassionate, facing down Whoopi Goldberg, who leans forward, one hand slicing the air between them, her expression sharp, defiant. Between them, the tension was almost visible, thick as smoke. The caption that first accompanied it was simple. Live on The View, Clinton confronted. But the truth behind the image was anything but simple. That morning, the set of The View pulsed with a rehearsed rhythm. The warm studio lights, polished table, cameras gliding silently across tracks. It was television magic. The audience, a curated cross-section of daytime America, clapped on cue. But when Bill Clinton walked on stage, the energy shifted. He wasn't there to sell a book or reminisce about the 90s. He was there because Whoopi Goldberg had invited him to a segment billed spirituality and power in modern America. On the surface, it was a broad, safe topic, but anyone who knew Whoopi's interview style understood that nothing about it would stay safe. From the moment Clinton sat down, in his crisp navy suit and signature gentle charisma, Whoopi had been leading him through a subtle minefield. Questions about influence, morality, truth, and leadership. Then came the pivot. "Mr. President," she said, voice smooth, but eyes gleaming with intention, "you often speak of your faith, quietly, respectfully. But do you really believe Christianity is the truth in a world where billions find peace elsewhere?" It was a loaded question, framed not as curiosity, but as indictment. The camera cut to Clinton. He nodded slowly, his left hand rising, gently resting on his chest, a gesture not rehearsed, but reflexive, like a man anchoring himself. His eyes didn't flinch. He looked directly at Whoopi, and then said, "I do believe it, but not because it makes me right and others wrong. I believe it because it's the only thing that held me together when the world pulled me apart." That was the moment the photo was taken. It froze not just Clinton's calm, but the flicker of something in Whoopi's expression, uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability, right before she recovered and leaned in with a sharper follow-up. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice tightening, "but that sounds an awful lot like exclusion. What about the millions of people, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, humanists? Are their truths not good enough?" A few claps from the audience. Some murmurs. The mood shifted. But Clinton didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. He simply leaned forward and began to speak. Not with debate, but with story. "I met a man in Little Rock a few years ago," he began. "Homeless. Vietnam vet. Hadn't spoken to his daughter in 15 years. He told me, 'Mr. President, I don't know what's real anymore, but when I sit outside that little church on 8th and Woodrow, I feel like God hasn't left me.'" He paused. I didn't argue theology with him. I just sat beside him. Because truth, Whoopi, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just what keeps a man breathing when he wants to stop. Silence. Not the kind of silence born of awkwardness. The kind that follows something too real to clap for. Clinton didn't blink. Whoopi blinked twice. Then she smiled, a practiced, professional smile, and leaned in again. "But isn't it dangerous," she said, "to promote a singular truth in a world that's fractured?" That was when Clinton delivered the line that would follow the photo across every screen in America. "What's dangerous is silence, when we know something saves lives, and we keep it to ourselves out of fear of offending someone else's comfort." The air seemed to shift. Someone in the audience clapped. Then another. Then a wave. Whoopi sat back, her hands clasped. She didn't rebut. She didn't need to. The conversation wasn't over, but something had undeniably landed. That single photo, Clinton's hand to chest, Whoopi in mid-retort, was captured by an assistant producer watching from the wings. It went viral within hours. Headlines spiraled. Clinton challenges modern relativism on live TV. Faith and fire. The View's most intense moment yet. Whoopi versus Bill, a clash of truths. But what the photo didn't show was what happened after the lights went down. Clinton and Whoopi spoke quietly off-air. No microphones. No cameras. Just two veterans of American discourse, one offering a worldview steeped in inclusion, the other in redemption. They didn't agree, but there was respect and attention. And as the internet raged, some praising Clinton as a moral lion, others accusing him of overstepping, a deeper question lingered under the surface of it all. In a world full of noise, does one man's calm conviction speak louder than 1,000 different truths? It took less than 4 hours for the photo to break the internet. By midday, the image of Bill Clinton and Whoopi Goldberg locked in a moment of philosophical collision had spread across every corner of social media. Twitter exploded first. Hashtags like hashtag Clinton stands firm and hashtag Whoopi versus Faith trended globally. Instagram Reels dissected every blink, breath, and brow twitch. TikTok creators layered music over the confrontation. Some dramatic, some mocking, some reverent. But the real war broke out in the headlines. CNN. A former president draws a line. Clinton reaffirms Christian belief in a secular age. Fox News. Clinton clashes with The View. Truth, not trendiness. The View's YouTube channel. Full segment. Clinton and Whoopi debate faith and freedom. 18M views in 12 hours. Vice. Is Bill Clinton the new face of conservative morality? But inside Clinton's Manhattan residence, there was no celebration. He sat alone in his den, the same Navy suit still on, tie loosened. The photo now appearing on every news site. He scrolled past. His wife, watching from the adjacent room, had said earlier with a hint of concern, "You were honest. That's good. But you know what comes next." And he did. Honesty, in this era, wasn't neutral. It was ammunition. Across the city, inside a production meeting at ABC, Whoopi Goldberg was not okay. The energy on set had been electric, but backstage was pure static. She watched the photo again and again, frozen on her tablet screen. Clinton, hand on his chest. Her own body leaned forward, eyes sharpened in mid-rebuttal. She had looked powerful, yes, but also exposed. He controlled the room. One producer whispered to another. She walked right into it. No one dared say it to her face, but she felt it, in her gut. It wasn't that Clinton had argued harder. He hadn't argued at all. He had anchored, and somehow that shook her more than if he'd fought back. Later that evening, Whoopi logged into Instagram, intending to share a clarifying message. A caption, maybe a reel, a classic move to reclaim narrative. But her inbox was flooded with thousands of DMs, some furious, accusing her of trying to silence faith. Others were oddly introspective. I've never heard anyone talk about Christianity like that before. Calm. Real. I'm rethinking a few things. And that's what bothered her most. Not the backlash, but the quiet ones. The ones who were moved. Across the country, churches picked up on the moment. Sermons on Sunday were titled Grace Under Fire and What Truth Sounds Like. Clinton's quotes were printed on bulletins, shared in group chats, whispered between pews. Truth isn't always loud. Silence is what's dangerous. Meanwhile, editorial boards were torn. The Atlantic ran a piece titled Clinton's Moral Revival, questioning whether the former president's moment marked a shift toward traditional conviction in a time of moral relativism. The New York Times was less generous. Charm or control. Clinton's return to religious center stage. But the real turning point came that Friday, during a quiet morning interview on NPR. Clinton, sounding tired but measured, was asked directly, Mr. President, would you say your comments were meant to confront the modern pluralistic view of spirituality? He paused, then answered, No. I'd say they were meant to offer something steady in a world that feels like it's always shifting. People think certainty is arrogance, but sometimes certainty is mercy. The clip was shared 12 million times in 24 hours, and while the media whirled, Whoopi withdrew. She canceled her next public appearance, citing scheduling conflicts. Inside her home, she replayed the episode over and over, pausing at the moment Clinton began his story about the homeless veteran, just sitting outside a church, holding on to a thread of hope. It haunted her, not because she disagreed, but because it felt familiar. She remembered a time, years ago, after a devastating loss, when she too had sat outside a spiritual center, unsure what she believed, but desperate for something real. Had she forgotten that? The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years encouraging people to find their path, and now she was questioning her own. Back in Washington, Clinton was advised to lean into the moment, appear on faith-based podcasts, write an op-ed, go back on The View. But he declined. He issued no follow-ups, no press releases, only a single post on his personal website. I didn't come to win a debate. I came to be honest. If that helped someone, then I'm grateful. If it challenged someone, then I'm glad we had the chance to speak plainly. Truth deserves daylight. The comment section exploded. Some praised him, others attacked. But the tone had changed. The culture war lines weren't clean anymore. This wasn't left versus right. It was clarity versus confusion, substance versus spin. And the photo, frozen, immortal, became the symbol of that shift. It hung on the wall of a church in Georgia. It was printed on the front page of a university ethics journal. It became a meme, a motivator, a mirror, because what the photo captured wasn't just a moment between two public figures. It was a nation watching itself. Do we believe what we say we believe? Do we still recognize truth when we see it? The photo hadn't changed. Still, it sat at the center of every conversation. Clinton steady, Whoopi sharp. A man speaking softly. A woman caught mid-pushback. But as the days passed, the way people looked at the photo did change. And that shift, quiet, creeping, was what made it powerful. In living rooms across America, people weren't arguing about politics anymore. They were asking quieter questions. Why did that hit me so hard? Why did Clinton's words feel true? Am I missing something? Meanwhile, inside a modest brownstone in Manhattan, Whoopi Goldberg sat in her kitchen, a mug of untouched coffee beside her. The house was silent. No staff. No meetings. Just her and the echo of a moment she hadn't seen coming. On her laptop screen, the photo stared back at her. She'd saved it. Not for vanity. For analysis. Obsession, even. At first, she'd seen defiance in her eyes, strength. But now she saw something else. Tension. And in Clinton's face, peace. That, more than anything, unnerved her. She closed the laptop and stepped into the living room. The walls were lined with awards, Emmys, a Tony, honorary degrees. Symbols of a career built on control, on commanding space, on being the most assured voice in the room. But she couldn't stop hearing his voice. Sometimes certainty is mercy. It was maddening. She'd invited him on the show to expose how outdated faith could be. Instead, he exposed something in her, a fatigue, a spiritual dryness she hadn't named, but had been carrying for years. She hadn't prayed in decades. She meditated. She journaled. She spoke often about the universe. But that photo, his hand to his chest, speaking not from intellect but experience, had cracked something open. And she wasn't the only one. Across the country, small but noticeable things began to happen. Round Pushpin, a book club in Seattle, swapped out a memoir for the Gospel of John, just to see what the fuss is about. Round pushpin a viral TikTok of a Gen Z influencer crying as she recounted Clinton's NPR quote, "People think certainty is arrogance, but sometimes certainty is mercy." Round pushpin a Muslim college student in Chicago wrote a Medium post titled, "Bill Clinton didn't dismiss me. He reminded me what conviction looks like." The comment section was full of people who didn't agree with Clinton theologically, but felt drawn to his sincerity. One said, "I don't believe what he believes, but I believe he believes it. That matters more than we admit." Whoopi read that comment 3 times, and it hit her harder than any criticism. That's what she tried to do for years. Live authentically, speak her truth. But somewhere along the way, she turned conviction into caution. Everyone's right. Everything's valid. Keep the peace. Keep the audience. And yet, when Clinton broke that mold, when he didn't bend, people leaned in. Not because he shouted, because he didn't. She began rereading old books, one she dismissed as rigid. She found a dog-eared copy of Mere Christianity on a guest shelf. She opened it, highlighted sections from someone else long ago. The words felt uncomfortably timely. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth. She closed the book and wept. Later that week, her assistant offered to post a clarifying video, reframe the narrative. A standard PR move. Whoopi declined. "No more spin," she said. "I need to sit in this." On the other side of the country, Bill Clinton sat quietly in the garden behind his home in Chappaqua. He hadn't done another interview, hadn't posted again, and yet the storm still swirled around him. Or maybe because of that, his team urged him to capitalize on the momentum. "You've started a conversation. Step into it. Shape it." But he shook his head. Sometimes truth works better when you stop trying to manage it. Instead, he wrote in his journal. He read old letters from constituents. He rewatched a video someone had sent him, a clip of Whoopi, in a different year, talking about losing her faith. "I used to believe," she had said, but it felt like the answers stopped coming. Clinton closed the video and said aloud, to no one in particular, "Maybe the answers never stopped. Maybe we stopped asking." And still the photo spread. One church printed it on their Easter bulletin. Another put it on a billboard with no text, just the image. At a liberal arts college in Vermont, a theology professor opened her semester with a prompt. Describe this moment. What does it ask of you? Students wrote about truth, about grace, about the courage to speak when it might cost something. And back in Manhattan, Whoopi, who once opened the View with polished authority, now stood backstage, waiting to re-enter a world that had begun to turn. This time, she wasn't sure she'd be in charge, but maybe, for the first time in a long time, she was finally ready to listen. The photo was still framed on Whoopi's phone screen when she stepped onto the stage again. It had been 9 days. 9 days of silence. No segments. No interviews. No tweets. Her absence hadn't gone unnoticed. Entertainment blogs whispered of health reasons. Others suggested a suspension, though none had occurred. The truth was simpler and stranger. She needed space to think. Now, as she crossed the floor of the View studio once more, her steps were slower, her energy quieter. The stage crew, used to her booming hellos, only got a small wave. Her co-hosts watched her carefully, not with judgment, but with that same alertness a crowd gives a tightrope walker. The segment was already live. She took her seat. The glass table, polished and perfect, now looked less like a platform and more like a confessional. She looked out at the audience, and then directly at the camera. Her voice was lower than usual. No fanfare. No preamble. "I want to talk about something that happened and stayed with me." A hush swept through the studio. It's not often that a moment on this show follows you home. Not just in headlines or memes, but in here. She tapped her chest. Inside. The camera zoomed gently as she continued. When President Clinton sat here last week, I thought I was ready. I had my questions, my research, my convictions. But I wasn't ready for him. Not the politician, not the former president, but the man who sat quietly and said things I didn't expect to shake me. Her voice wavered just slightly. She didn't fight it. I saw that photo. You've seen it too. Me, mid-question. Him, hand on his chest. You think it's just two people disagreeing. But what I see now is something deeper. I see myself trying to challenge truth, and him refusing to argue about it. The audience was silent. It wasn't TV anymore. It was something else. I've spent a lot of years advocating for everyone's path, and I still believe in the freedom to seek. But what I've forgotten, what he reminded me, is that truth doesn't need to shout to be true. Somewhere in the third row, a woman wiped her eyes. Whoopi leaned back slightly, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I don't have a conclusion yet, but I'm listening now. I think that's where it starts. The show cut to commercial early. No panel. No celebrity guest. No buzzy topic. Just a pause. And across America, people felt it. Meanwhile, in a small town in Georgia, a pastor played the clip on a loop in his office. His teenage son, once skeptical of anything churchy, watched over his shoulder and said, "She's not pretending. That's why it matters." In a retirement home in Iowa, two elderly women debated what Clinton had really meant by certainty is mercy. One of them, raised Catholic but long estranged from religion, said quietly, "I think he meant it saves you from drowning in yourself." And in Chappaqua, Clinton was reading. Not emails. Not op-eds, letters. Handwritten ones. They'd started arriving 2 days after the interview. Hundreds, now over 1,000. One from a high school teacher in Oregon. "Your calm reminded me of my father. He died 2 years ago. I haven't thought about faith since, but I'm thinking now." Another from a truck driver in Kansas. "I've believed for years, but I've been quiet. You gave me permission to stop whispering." Clinton sat on the porch as the fall sun dipped low. He held one letter in his hand, but wasn't reading it. He was thinking about Whoopi. About that moment. He didn't know she'd gone quiet. He didn't know she'd spoken again. But he felt something shifting in the wind. Something small, subtle, yet real. A call came in. It was a producer from The View. "We're doing a follow-up special. Faith in America. We want you back." Clinton didn't answer immediately. He stared at the sky for a long beat, then simply said, "Only if it's not about me. Let's make it about the moment." The planning began. Not for a debate, but for something different. A circle, not a stage. An invitation, not an interrogation. The photo, that photo, would be displayed behind them. Not as a trophy, not as evidence, but as a spark. And the country, still divided on everything else, was beginning to whisper in a rare unison. Maybe truth isn't about winning. Maybe it's about what remains standing after everyone else stops talking. The studio was different this time. Gone was the usual View setup, the glass table, the 5 chairs, the gliding cameras. In its place stood a simple circle of armchairs, bathed in soft, amber light. No audience clapped. No stage crew whispered instructions. Just quiet and intention. At the center, backlit on a translucent screen, hung the photo that had sparked it all. Bill Clinton, calm and steady, hand over his heart. Whoopi Goldberg, mid-question, leaned forward, defiant, engaged, human. Tonight wasn't about ratings. It wasn't even a broadcast. It was a recorded conversation, to be aired once, unedited, unpromoted, on a Sunday evening slot usually reserved for reruns. As Clinton entered the circle, dressed plainly in a charcoal blazer and open-collared shirt, he glanced up at the photo. his lips pressed into a faint, knowing smile. Whoopi was already seated. No makeup, no colorful ensemble, just a gray sweater and jeans. She didn't rise to greet him, but she did look up, eyes softer than before. He took his seat across from her. A pause. Then she spoke. "I've been thinking about that day ever since." He nodded once. "Me too." She looked down, hands clasped tightly. "I tried to prove a point. You gave me a story, and I didn't know what to do with that." He tilted his head. "That story wasn't for argument. It was for remembering." Silence. It lingered, not awkward, but full. Then Whoopi leaned forward. "People keep asking me if I've changed." She laughed quietly. "I don't know, but I'm tired of fighting silence with noise." Clinton's smile deepened. "You don't need to change," he said gently. "Just be honest. That's where everything real begins." She looked up, her eyes a little glassy. "I thought I had to protect people from narrow ideas. Keep every option open." "And did it work?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "It just made everything float. Nothing landed." Clinton exhaled, slow and even. "You asked me something that day. If believing in one truth was divisive." He paused. "I think pretending all things are equal, that's what breaks us. Not belief, but fear of belief." She nodded, not to agree, but to acknowledge the weight of it. And then, for the first time, she asked him something not as an interviewer, but as a person. "What made you hold on to that truth? Through the scandals, the hate, the years?" Clinton's gaze dropped briefly to the floor. Then he raised his eyes. "Because it held onto me first." The words hung in the air like incense, weightless, but impossible to ignore. She wiped at her cheek without apology. And for the next 20 minutes, there were no zingers, no hot takes, just two public figures sharing how truth had followed them when fame had faded, how certainty had begun to feel less like arrogance and more like mercy. The special ended without a statement. No credits, no outro music, just one final image, the two of them sitting quietly. No words, no gestures, just presence. That frame, the second photo, spread too. Not as viral, not as dramatic, but deeper. It appeared in unexpected places. A church newsletter titled it "Grace After Fire." A university ethics lecture called it "Reverence in Dialogue." A 19-year-old girl reposted it with a caption, "Maybe the bravest thing isn't defending your truth. It's sitting still in someone else's." In the end, there was no winner. Just a moment that refused to be tamed. And a reminder, long after the screens faded to black. Truth doesn't always demand agreement. Sometimes it just asks to be heard. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe and press the like button.